This episode is not legal advice, and anyone taking any action in response to the inhumane and criminal treatment of immigrants in the United States does so on their own volition and at their own risk. Welcome to Talking Shit About, a monthly show for guests to talk about something they love, something they hate, and hopefully by the end we've all learned something. I'm your host, Elizabeth, and this month we have a special episode. Instead of a guest, I have commissioned one of my Satanist friends from the previous podcast episode to translate this episode into Spanish, so keep your eyes peeled for that. But this episode, again, has no guest. Instead, I'm going to be talking at you about ICE raids. Without further ado, let's talk some shit.
I was like, what the fuck does that mean? I have friends that are firefighters and I know that they use soap.
And she was screaming at me over soup.
Fuck this, I am not ever talking to a Scientologist again. These people are all insane.
I'm putting my bricks in the dumpsters, motherfuckers. Do you see me, bitches? I'm throwing my bricks. And he's just like chucking bricks.
The sources for this episode can be found in the show notes, as well as links to other resources. The source we'll cite the most is a toolkit prepared by the Immigrant Defense Project and Center for Constitutional Rights titled Defend Against ICE Raids and Community Arrests. This month we'll be talking about ICE raids, and how to respond to an ICE raid to provide support and safety to our friends, families, neighbors, coworkers, and other members of our communities. We'll get into the raids, but first let's go into a little background on the agencies at play. The Department of Homeland Security, or DHS, was established in 2003 under the former U.S. President George W. Bush in response to 9/11. ICE, the United States Immigration and Customs Enforcement, resides under the DHS umbrella and took over enforcement duties for the Immigration and Naturalization Service when it was created in 2003. After the restructuring, U.S. Customs and Border Protection now monitors ports of entry into the U.S., U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services handles visas, and ICE detains and removes individuals from the country. Over 5 million people have been deported from the U.S. since the creation of the Department of Homeland Security. Under Bush, the agency initially targeted countries with large Muslim populations, as well as people crossing the southern border. ICE expanded under the Obama administration, which furthered the focus on immigrants with convictions and accelerated criminalization of immigration-related offenses, resulting in radicalized policing, mass imprisonment, surveillance, and excessive punishment. Here's a quote from CBS Chicago in January about ICE under Biden and the first Trump administrations. Quote, CBS News Chicago set out to compare the data on ICE arrests over the last 8 years, starting in 2017 during President Trump's first administration and continuing through former President Joe Biden's administration, which ended this month. The CBS News Chicago investigators' data team found President Trump's largest single year for ICE arrests came in 2018, with 158,581 ICE arrests nationwide for the year and a daily average of 434. In comparison, Biden's largest year was 2023. The data shows ICE made 1,000 more such arrests a month than during the Trump administration, with a total of 170,570 arrests and an average of 467 per day. End quote. Since taking office last month, Trump has announced a multitude of executive orders on immigration, including expansion of the nation's detention infrastructure and to begin detaining everyone arrested by DHS pending their deportation. ICE can now conduct arrests in previously safe spaces, including schools, churches, and other places of worship, funeral and wedding sites, public demonstrations, hospitals, and courthouses. Expansion of the number of people subjected to no bond mandatory detention. Expansion of expedited removal, a process that allows DHS to detain and deport someone on an accelerated timeline without a hearing before an immigration judge. Expedited removal for people who were lawfully paroled into the country using the Biden administration's now defunct CBP-1 app and the Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Venezuela program. Direction for the Department of Justice, DOJ, and DHS to immediately review and audit all federal contracts and grants to non-governmental organizations, or NGOs, providing services to immigrants who are alleged to be removable. On January 22nd, the DOJ ordered legal service providers to cease work on critical programs, including the Legal Orientation Program, the Immigration Court Help Desk, the Family Group Legal Orientation Program, and the Council for Children Initiative, and the unconstitutional executive order that seeks to strip certain people born in the United States of their U.S. citizenship, which is currently facing litigation. So who does ICE target? The people most at risk for deportation include people without lawful immigration status, meaning they do not have authorization from the federal government to be in the United States and can be deported for any reason, as well as people with lawful immigration status who have criminal convictions. Someone with lawful immigration status and a criminal conviction can be deported even if the conviction is decades old, if the person did not serve any time in jail, if the case was considered minor or a misdemeanor, or if the person has had status for a long time. ICE also has quotas for arrests, meaning that they have specific numbers of people they look to deport, and Trump has expanded these quotas since taking office last month. These are the categories that DHS uses to classify immigrants as key targets for deportation. First is the term criminal alien, which is generally used to refer to a non-citizen or even immigrants with lawful citizenship status who had some criminal history or contact with the criminal legal system, regardless of the type or severity of the crime. A convicted criminal is a term used by ICE as an individual convicted in the United States for one or more criminal offenses. This does not include civil traffic offenses. A suspected or confirmed gang member, to quote the ICE Raid Toolkit, is, quote, according to a Federal Register notice, ICE maintains ICE Gangs, a database that collects and stores information about adults and juveniles who qualify as suspected or confirmed gang members and associates under ICE criteria. How ICE defines or identifies a gang member, whether suspected or confirmed, is not publicly available, but its gang definition seems broader than the federal law definition of gangs and California's definition of street gangs. ICE Gangs also collects information about associates, but the criteria for affiliates and associates of gangs have also not been disclosed, end quote. Finally, a fugitive alien, according to ICE, is someone who has been ordered removed, deported, or excluded by an immigration judge but has not left the U.S. or has failed to report to DHS after receiving notice to do so, regardless if the person has a criminal record. So how does ICE locate people? The first is collaboration with law enforcement through the sharing of databases such as the FBI's National Crime Information Center, or NCIC. Second, you know all those privacy statements that we blow past to the accept and continue button? Well, a large portion of the Department of Homeland Security's budget is dedicated to data management, meaning they're using service providers like Amazon to collect and manage data on individuals. Other places ICE looks to for information includes the DMV, U.S. Customs, state criminal records, state registries, and immigration applications. ICE's most well-known arrest tactic is a raid, which is essentially an unannounced visit to an area that is suspected to have a population of undocumented immigrants, often with a particular individual as the target. With Trump's executive order allowing ICE to enter spaces that were previously off limits, the following information may change, but in general, ICE will target these two types of places. Home raids, just as they sound, raids on private residences, apartment complexes, and shelters. And work raids, again, just as they sound, ICE targets places of work likely to have immigrants working there, such as factories and farms. Work and home raids often include collateral arrests, meaning that there are individuals at risk of deportation who were present during an arrest made for a specific target. Other places ICE will look for targets include jails, courthouses, probation and parole offices, and checkpoints. Some tactics you'll see ICE use to find and detain targets are coercion. ICE will attempt to enter the private properties without a proper warrant or consent. To lawfully enter a non-public space, ICE needs a judicial warrant, but will often show up with an ICE administrative warrant, which does not have the same power as a judicial warrant. More on that later. To further coerce people to exit non-public spaces, ICE will surround the building or residence with guns visible or drawn and will create an air of urgency. ICE has utilized someone opening their front door as permission to enter the property, pushing past the person who opened the door. Tactics like this have been deemed unconstitutional by some judges, but are still utilized. Another tactic that has been deemed illegal by the courts is the use of threats and force, including drawing weapons, grabbing and pulling, hitting, and damaging property. Another tactic is deception and ruses. ICE will pretend to be police in order to get close to a target by requesting help with a criminal investigation, claiming the target is a victim of identity theft or fraud, or calling a targeted person and arranging a meeting to clear up an accusation. ICE will also collaborate with local police, probation officers, and parole officers to gain access to non-public spaces. In regard to gangs, I'm going to again quote the ICE Raid Toolkit. Quote, ICE made frequent use of local law enforcement databases to identify targets as gang members or associates, regardless of whether such individuals had ever been arrested, charged, or convicted of any crime. In some cases, ICE agents labeled individuals as gang associates simply by virtue of having been arrested during a gang operation or living in a home where a gang member was thought to have lived at one time. And finally, surveillance. ICE utilizes information stored in criminal database systems, federal and local databases, and will physically follow targets to detain them in public spaces. To anyone who is listening that is at risk or thinks they may be at risk of deportation, here are some tips for emergency preparedness. 1. Organize your personal documents. Keep your original documents secure and give copies to a trusted person. Important documents include identification, immigration documents, and criminal documents, if any. Always keep on you or easily accessible contact information for your doctors, a list of medications and doses, childcare information, your lawyer's contact information, and contact information for loved ones. 2. Seek a legal screening. There are nonprofits that provide free legal screenings to see if you are eligible for legal defense against deportation. Be wary of scams and get everything in writing. 3. Plan for medical needs. Write down crucial medical information, including contact information for your provider and a list of medication and doses, as well as designate a trusted person to have access to your medical history and progress. You can do this by signing a HIPAA waiver with your provider. Plan for childcare needs. Identify a trusted person who can care for your children if you are detained. Ensure this person agrees and has access to their important documents and provide them with the following: school location and contact information, important medical information such as allergies, provider information, and a list of medications, emergency contact information for family, friends, or other supports, and you may also want to consult a lawyer about special power of attorney or guardianship options for your children should you be detained. And 5, plan for financial needs. Consult with an expert to see what options are available, such as special power of attorney. Now, if you encounter ICE, here's what to do. But first, a note from the ACLU. If you are not a U.S. citizen and an immigrant agent requests your immigration papers, you must show them if you have them with you. This requirement only applies to immigration agents. You do not have to show any documents to local or state police, except that you do have to show a valid driver's license if police pull you over for a traffic violation. Okay, if ICE is outside your door, do not open the door. Ask to see a warrant signed by a judge. Tell them you do not consent to them coming into your home. Tell them to please leave. If ICE comes into your home, tell them you do not agree with their presence or search. Ask to see a warrant signed by a judge. Do not interrupt an arrest. If ICE stops you out in the community, remain silent except when you ask to speak to a lawyer or say that you do not agree with their search. And if you are arrested by ICE, remain silent except when you ask to speak to a lawyer and do not sign anything. When examining a warrant, know the difference between a judicial warrant, which is valid for entry and arrest, civil and administrative warrants, which are not valid. There will be links to examples in the show notes. If you are detained or witness an arrest by ICE, here's what to know about recording and documenting. Important information you'll want to record in the event of a raid, arrest, or any interaction with immigration authorities includes date, time, and exact location of incident, what you were doing, names and contacts of anyone present, especially witnesses, all officer and agent names and badge numbers, as well as their physical descriptions, descriptions of officers and agents' vehicles, details of the event, being sure to include if officers or agents do any of the following: enter a home without proper consent, search a home without proper consent, dismiss medical or child care needs during an arrest, harass or threaten witnesses, engage in abusive behavior in relation to gender identity or sexual orientation, which may have changed under Trump's new DEI policies, and if they use verbal or physical force or weapons against individuals. Finally, take pictures of any warrants or documents presented by officers and agents and forward to a trusted person. It is legal to videotape a raid, however, keep the following in mind when doing so. Before pulling out your camera or phone, assess the situation and whether or not recording will escalate the situation and pose a threat to the safety of anyone present. You must make it obvious that you are recording, as most states have laws against one-way consent recording. You may not interfere with law enforcement, meaning you should stay several feet away. If ICE comes to your place of work, call a lawyer. If agents inquire, tell them it's your organization's policy to do so. 2. In general, ICE agents are allowed to enter lobbies without a warrant or permission, as lobbies are typically considered public spaces. The same does not apply to conference room, private offices, etc., so be sure your organization has determined which spaces are public and which are private. Place signs such as private or employees only as appropriate. 3. Your organization should have one person or a selected few designated to speak with ICE agents, and all other staff and volunteers should be trained to inform the officials that only the designated individuals are authorized to review a warrant or consent to their entry into private areas, and decline to answer any further questions from the officials. Individual employees and clients should state out loud that they wish to remain silent. Neither your employees nor your clients need to answer questions about their immigration status, where they were born, or how they entered the United States. Have the designated party review the warrant to ensure its validity. And 6, monitor and record the raid or search. If you hear of a raid in your area, fact-check it to avoid sharing misinformation and creating panic. Some words of warning to people who want to protect their loved ones and community members. Under federal law, it is a criminal offense punishable by a fine or imprisonment for any person who, quote, knowing or in reckless disregard of the fact that an alien has come to, entered, or remains in the United States in violation of law, conceals, harbors, or shields from detection, or attempts to conceal, harbor, or shield from detection, such alien in any place, including any building or any means of transportation. This means anyone who knowingly harbors an undocumented immigrant can face legal consequences. The following can constitute harboring: providing shelter, providing transportation, providing direction on how to obtain false documentation, providing warnings about impending investigations that facilitates a person's continuing unlawful presence in the United States, conduct tending to substantially facilitate an immigrant's remaining in the U.S. unlawfully, providing or offering a known undocumented individual a secure haven, a refuge, a place to stay in which authorities are unlikely to be seeking them. To establish a violation of the harboring provision, all the government needs to show is that 1. The immigrant entered or remained in the United States in violation of the law. 2. The person concealed, harbored, or sheltered the immigrant in the United States. 3. The defendant knew or recklessly disregarded the fact that the immigrant was not authorized to be present in the U.S. And 4. The person took some action that tended to substantially facilitate the immigrant's remaining in the United States in violation of the law. There is legal precedent for harboring charges against employers who knowingly hire and assist undocumented immigrants, those knowingly providing housing, for conduct that instructs or undocumented immigrants on how to avoid arrest and detection by immigration authorities, and conduct that impedes an investigation. Before you jump in to help, know the laws in your state, county, and city. Have a plan for if and when you're arrested, and know how best to keep others and yourself safe and protected. I want to close by quoting the foreword from the ICE Raid Toolkit. It is no accident that ICE guides and trains its officers to use techniques that further the reach and harms of policing of communities of color. Much like other law enforcement agencies with documented discriminatory outcomes, ICE policies and strategies encourage and justify overly aggressive policing tactics, widespread surveillance, and a disregard for constitutional and human rights. ICE's unchecked zeal to target, arrest, and deport immigrants with convictions not only destroys families and communities, but also reinforces the inequalities of the criminal legal system upon which many of its policies rest. Yet despite the enormity of this system, it is not without weaknesses. A system that creates so much human pain, erodes fundamental fairness and human rights, and threatens the safety of millions is unsustainable. As the oppression grows, so too will the number of people who organize to reject its dehumanization, curb its growth, and uphold dignity and justice. We must continue to revisit key lessons, adjust our approach, support the leadership of communities on the front lines, and expand our toolbox accordingly. Thank you very much for listening to this episode of Talking Shit About. Please share this around, and if you haven't yet, give the show a rating. Helps me stay in the algorithms. And just keep each other safe. Remember that people deserve basic human rights, not because of the labor they contribute, but because they are human. Thank you again for listening, and we'll see you next month.